warning continues through most of the week. Sunny today with a high of 109. Sunny tomorrow. We're looking at a high of 111. For all that's going on in the Santa Clarita Valley, check us out on social media. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Or download the free app. Or just go to hometownstation.com.
Well, welcome everyone to Your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm Mike McGrath, your host. Thanks for joining us. Wanted to, in a minute, I'll introduce my guest for today's session. But in the meantime, just to remind you, the idea of the show was the idea that money touches everything we do. I've spent the last 22 years sitting across coffee tables and kitchen tables working through financial matters of all kinds, trying to distill kind of what's important to people, how to get them where they want to go. So taking some of that experience and bringing it to this show, bringing in some really good guests to talk about those same issues. Today we're going to talk a lot about the idea of purpose and intentionality with how we use our resources, mostly how we can be others-oriented about it. Obviously, we live in a culture here in the United States and Southern California where you're measured more like which kind of BMW you drive as opposed to anything else that might be oriented to somebody else. So I have someone, it's been a mentor of mine. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. But I want to tell a couple of things here to get us set up. So the guest is Steve LePore, so thank you for joining me, Steve.
My pleasure.
So Steve has been a longtime friend and mentor of mine, and I'm going to tell you kind of my interaction with him. And then I'm going to kind of do a couple transition things here with you, Steve. But so I met Steve when I was 19 years old, and I was a college student, and Steve was an executive at an entertainment company down in Hollywood, and I needed a job. So he was gracious enough to give me a job that, by the way, I was totally unqualified for.
So was I.
But he gave me some grace, and I was able to grow into the job. But while I was working there, Steve had gotten involved with, just because it was in Hollywood, with helping out here and there with the homeless. And that led to making, and I'm sort of collapsing some history here, but into making some sack lunches every Friday night. We get together with some friends, and that became a special route. And then you got to know the guys and gals on the street and so on and so forth. And so other groups got involved in donating food. It ended up being kind of neat to be a part of. And if it ended there, it'd be a great story. But I don't remember the dates, but I remember the day Steve had decided to leave his nice corporate, comfortable job and just to kind of cast adrift here, sort of Cortez burning the ships on the coastline here, and started what became an organization. Some of you may have heard listening here called My Friend's Place, that served runaway youth on the street and helped them get off the street, helped them survive on the street. And so he never looked back. But I look back now with humor because I remember it was your last day at the office and you're packing your stuff up. And my infinite 19-year-old wisdom, I'm really concerned for you, thinking that you'd made a horrible financial decision. Of course, I had no money at the time either. I was 19. I still only have $2 to my name, but that's okay. No, and I remember trying to almost coach you out of it almost, and you couldn't wait to leave. Not so much you hated the job, but just you knew where you were going. And that was a lesson for me. So that's when I was thinking of this topic. That's why I thought of you.
Ah, that's great.
Because that became kind of a pattern for me and hopefully inspired others as well, just in my life. But the idea that whatever you have, time, talent, treasure, it should be others focused. And not that you don't take care of yourself, but you take care of other people. You saw a need, you filled the need. And I'm going to let you kind of fill in some of the blanks of some of the My Friend's Place stories that eventually led to working with, I guess the operative phrase is at-risk youth.
That's right.
In the suburbs. And
here
then
in Santa Clarita.
Right here in Santa Clarita. And then working with men who have been sexually abused, in 1 in 6.
Adult men who either were abused as children sexually or assaulted sexually as adults.
Right. In a lot of ways, you've, in a sense, gone there, and subjects that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. But to kind of go there to provide some kind of solution. So your focus in terms of your time, talent, and treasure has been really on that. So for 31 years, we've been in that world. So that's why I wanted to bring Steve in, because he was an influence on me and many others here in Santa Clarita alone, let alone in the rest of the places you've gone and been. So here's a thought as I transition. So as a financial planner with EP Wealth Advisors, so we're a fee-only advisor, so we're not selling any stuff. Oftentimes our conversations are centered around values, right? So these aren't my questions. So this is George Kinder, okay? So if you follow financial planning writers, he's well known. But so he has 3 questions. I'm not asking you per se. You don't have to answer these, but just for those listening, this is kind of the mindset I want to get us into. So, and you have to ask these in succession. So he says, so first question is, you imagine that you are financially secure. You have enough money to take care of your needs now and the future. It's not an issue. So the question would be, how would you live your life? What would you do with the money, and would you change anything that you're currently doing? So kind of a positive thing, first of all, to think that you're financially secure. You don't have to worry about it. But the idea is whatever it is that you are doing, would you change that if you didn't have to worry about money? He then asks the second question, going a little more negative here. You're at the doctor's office, and the doctor tells you, unfortunately, you have 5 to 10 years left to live. The good news, if there is good news in that, is that you'll never feel sick. The bad news is that you'll have no notice of the moment of your death. Okay. The question with that scenario is, what do you do with the time that you have remaining? Okay. A little darker, third and final question is, your doctor now shocks you with the news that you have 1 day left to live. It's effectively over. Okay. Notice whatever feelings you're feeling at that point, you're facing your mortality. The question is, what dreams are left unfulfilled? What do I wish, or do you wish you had finished? Or who do you wish you had been? So these are great questions sitting across from someone who's now thinking of fill in the blank, retirement, sending kids to college, or the classic stuff we're always dealing with, and those things need to be dealt with. But the values underlying those things is what we're trying to get to. And so I always try to get people to focus a little bit on, and talking to their kids often as they get ready for college or in college, in addition to all the conversations about how much college costs and all that fun stuff, what do you want to do with your life? Like, I have kids who are in their 20s. What do you want to do? Let's not make it about money. Money is necessary. We got to pay rent, but let's think about this. So, you don't have to answer those questions. But so, Steve, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is just the lessons that you've learned, and you can tell it through the stories and you've told some great stories to me about what you've done, what you've learned in that, and the idea is speaking to those who may be considering these things. The idea here is being hospitable, is being generous, is being charitable. Again, not just with money. People have various amounts of money, but money, time, the abilities that we have, that sort of thing.
Sure.
If I could start, and I want you to finish the story, but in fact, I'll just transition to you. One of my favorite stories, something that you learned, which I've sent to others, because it deals with kids, is when you went and you spoke to a youth group at a church, and what transpired there as you were trying to make them aware of the kids that you dealt with on a daily basis at my friend's place.
Is that where you want to start?
Yeah, let's start there because I want to bridge off of that.
Sure, because we'll go back if that works for you.
Yeah.
And again, as I was speaking with you earlier, what's important to me is that folks realize that this is really my observations about other people.
Right.
That it's their stories. I have the good fortune to tell them, but nonetheless, that's my observation. And this particular one that you mentioned happened at a very large church in Orange County, probably 20 years ago now. One of the mega churches, so big that their youth group, their high school group, I believe had 400 or 500 kids in it,
wow.
And they actually had the youth center, which had stadium seating. And freshmen were in front, seniors were on top, and it was like you walk in and it's like, okay, I'm not sure what we're going to say to these students, but they wanted to know about what it was like to work with people who were on the street, and then what it was like, to the best of my ability to communicate it, what it was like to be on the street. And it happened to be around the holidays, and so it was a little bit cold, maybe rainy, I don't remember. But for some reason, the tangent went to how difficult it is for young kids on the street to care for themselves, to stay healthy, to stay warm. And I began talking about when you're homeless and when you're on the street, if you don't have socks, you wrap your feet in newspaper.
Right.
And if you don't have shoes, then you don't have shoes. Or if you do have them and they begin to wear out, they just begin to wear out. And as I was talking about this, completely unprompted by me. And again, the students sat in sections. There was this freshman boy. He was in the freshman section, and he looked like he was 10. So I don't know how old you are as a freshman, but he was 14 or 15, and his eyes were as big as saucers. And he was really fixated on what it meant to be his age, but homeless, to be on the streets. And as I'm telling the story, he begins to take his shoes off. And then he begins to take his socks off and put them in the shoes. And then he stood up, didn't say a word. Then he stood up and brought his pair of shoes and his socks and sat them right next to me.
While you're still speaking?
While I'm talking. And I was shocked, obviously. I was taken aback. But what happened next was amazing. And this happened because of a 14-year-old who did not use words, but his actions.
Right.
A majority of the rest of the room followed suit in silence. They took their shoes off.
So we're talking hundreds of people.
Hundreds. I actually had to come back the next day with boxes with a truck to pick up all the shoes and the socks. That was started by a young boy who was moved to know about people that live on the street his age. Right. And I thought, wow, what an amazing example of the way that we are supposed to be.
Right. I remember when you told that story, I actually wrote about it. And the idea was asked to write an article about why we give to charity. And so I used that story because it was very powerful. I remember when you first told me, it was years ago, but there's still tears in your eyes as you were telling it. And what I wrote after that was, why would someone give? And there are more than three, but I came up with three reasons because I had to be pithy. So, but the idea was it gives purpose, right, other than ourselves.
Sure.
It actually provides pleasure when you give. I mean, there was an enjoyment in a different sense probably for him to know that he had made an impact on someone's life who he'd probably never meet.
Ever.
Right? And it also, the last one was it's a protection against just our the natural tendency to insulate ourselves. So we live in Santa Clarita, or just call it Southern California, Los Angeles, a lot of wealth in this area. So the more we're able to surround ourselves with, the more insulated we can be.
Sure.
And striving for some comfort isn't in and of itself a negative thing, but you might read about a tough story or a tough situation. You kind of brought it off the pages of the proverbial newspaper and brought it right in front of him.
Yeah, and I would add to your list, in fact, I'd put it at the very top, he gave because there was need.
Right.
Period.
So there's an awareness aspect of what the need is, but there's just the empathy factor of, I got to do something.
So what do we do? I mean, when we're aware of a need, whether it's within our own family, in our community, in the world at large, what is our response?
Right.
More often than not, we turn away and we focus on what our needs are. Right. This young fellow, whose name I don't know, I will probably never meet him. He
if
saw
you're listening.
a need, or he heard about a need. Yeah. He saw and heard about this need, and he said, I can do something within his own means.
Right.
He didn't write a check. He didn't, get up and say, we need to do this, just very quietly. I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
But what was so powerful was that in his silence, in his very simple act of giving, he moved an entire room of students.
As a freshman.
Right.
So that says something.
There
if you were
have
the
it.
senior and everyone knew who you were, you're
Sure.
the
Follow
big
him
man
off
or
a
woman
cliff.
on campus type of thing. But this was the least of these, I guess,
That's
in
exactly
a sense.
right.
So there's the one thing where you're dealing with, on the one hand, the people who need the help. You've also dealt with many times, I'm sure, whether it's awareness in general or asking funds as you raise money for organizations or just something specific.
Sure.
Had that child, if I can say child, young man, not done that, you could have gone to that church theoretically and said, hey, I'm doing this drive to get all these shoes. Can you, every one of you, go buy a $50 pair of shoes and give them to me?
That's right.
So different ways to get to the same point. But what are some of the things that you've experienced in trying to get those who have something, again, doesn't always have to be money, but maybe get them to volunteer with you? I mean, I remember stories when I was in that same 19, 20-year-old range, and I'd go with you to feed the homeless, and as a suburban kid, I was shocked. I mean, you kind of knew it was there, but you didn't really know it was there until you were there. So there's that aspect, but asking whether you're at churches or nonprofit organizations, looking for help to raise the funds necessary to run these things. What are some of the things that maybe that you've learned from that as far as inspiring others to catch on the vision. And
Well, you've heard me tell so many stories, either over dinner or from a stage. But if I were to go all the way back to the very beginning, the greatest lesson that I learned in the beginning of this trajectory of life for me was as a 19-year-old. And I graduated from a Jesuit college prep. I knew that I did not want to go right to college. And so I was crazy enough to say, I'm going to go somewhere and I'd like to help if I could. And so I opened a National Geographic, and I said, wherever it opens, that's where I'm going to move.
Are you kidding?
Truthfully. And it opened to Guatemala, and that's where I moved. Fast forward the story about Guatemala. I was 19, and I went with a friend, Mike Sullivan, and there was this young boy who was 9 who just followed us like a puppy. He just thought that we were the cat's meow. And great kid, but he was a 9-year-old, Guatemalan. I never saw him with anything other than the same pair of pants.
Okay.
I never saw him wear shoes. And but I never saw anybody with more joy. He was just dirt poor, literally, but joyous. And for his birthday, his mom and dad gave us permission to take him to the lake. And so we caught a bunch of different buses, and every time the bus would stop, it was his birthday. His mom had given him a quarter, the equivalent of a U.S. quarter. And every time the bus would stop, he would get off and he'd go to a little panaderia or somewhere, and he would get a piece of cake or candy or whatever. But he would get that from me and for Mike Sullivan. And I kept thinking, this is,
so not for himself.
Not for himself. And I thought, wow. And so we would give him money back every time. And it became this game where, if we're not going to let you buy us cake. So we kept giving him money back. We finally get to the lake, enjoy a day or two at the lake. And one of the things that I really wanted to see, this was after the earthquake in 75, I really wanted to see this particular church that had been destroyed and one wall remained. Okay. And it was almost a place where there were pilgrimages made. And so we went. And on the side wall of this one remaining section of the church was this huge, enormous bronze plaque. And basically the plaque was about the importance of taking care of others, the importance of giving to the poor. And I remember, I'll never forget, it's actually formed part of who I am today, but I caught Miguel, our little 9-year-old friend, out of the side of my face. I looked over, and I saw him taking the money that we had given him, and he put it in the slot where you donate to the poor. And I thought, at that moment, that's really how I would like to be able to live my life, to be oblivious to his own need, and not that he was careless or that he didn't take care of himself, because again, he was the happiest kid in the town, but that he put the needs of others before himself. And to know that as a little Guatemalan 9-year-old boy, and to see that as a 19-year-old privileged American, I went, wow, that's pretty impressive. Now, if you fast forward the clock, and there's no need to dwell on it, but it's really cool. A friend of mine was down in Guatemala about 3 or 4 years ago doing some micro-lending. Okay. And I said, do me a favor, go by this town of Patsisia and tell me if you can find the Chun Chun family, and more specifically, Miguel Chun Chun. Well, he did.
No way.
And little Mike and I refer to him as little Mike. He's now 49. Oh, my God. We communicate on Facebook together.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Is he still the same way for the most part?
I don't know, in all honesty. Okay. He's a cab driver, has a wife and a bunch of kids. But what I do know is that he's still happy as can be.
Yeah, I wonder if that willingness to give to others is the reason he was always the happiest kid in town,
ask
right?
Him. Invite him on your program.
That'd be fun. I will do that. Well, and I think as I wrestle with sort of the, if I can call it this, the modern issues that we deal with, like clients are dealing with, like how can I help my kids get through school? How do I retire comfortably, which I have to put in quotations almost, right? I mean, what do you mean? What does that actually look like? How do I, if they have some wealth, right, how do I successfully give this to family, or the charity issue comes up? Sure. So we get lost in these how to do all of this stuff if you're sitting in my seat. And I think what I want to focus more on with folks before you get all to that stuff, because it is important, is sort of the why. And I think this is kind of helpful, I think, for a lot of my clients, I think our firm's clients, anyone listening, is the idea of the why has to come first. And then the how is kind of falls into place a little bit. So yeah, I'm thinking I'm helping trying to help my kids through college, but the idea was I want to help you through college so that you can launch yourself in life without having, $8 gazillion worth of debt, and you can never barely afford rent. So I do what I can. So they do what they can. And so we guerrilla warfare. But the idea of the why is, I think, a good why. The how becomes something that's a little bit different for everybody. So I think your why was just the idea of being a generous person. But we're going to come back in a minute, because it does come back to you a little bit, because when I intersected with you the first time, you were in the corporate life and doing all that, and then you transitioned out. So it's almost like bookends, right? Your experience as a 19-year-old, and then when you left the corporate world. So it's a clean break, so I'll stop there. But again, you're listening to Your Money Path with Mike McGrath. I'm your host, Mike McGrath, on KHTS 98.1 and AM 1220.
I just want to send a shout out to all my customers. It's Dave Reeves from Reeves Complete Auto Center in Canyon Country.
Reeves, Santa Clarita's choice for quality customer and automotive care.
I've been in automotive service my whole life. I learned customer service and honest communication make the difference.
Reeves, where customers matter.
I really appreciate your business and hope to serve you in the future. Thank you very much.
Reeves, on Ruther in Canyon Country.
Your hometown station.
KHTS is your official Santa Clarita Dodger station. You can catch all evening games right here on your hometown station. For all the latest news and updates on your Los Angeles Dodgers, KHTS has you covered. Go to hometownstation.com.
98.1 FM and AM 1220.
Who says nothing good happens after midnight? Denny's is best known for their breakfast served round the clock, like the Grand Slam. But you can enjoy breakfast, lunch, or dinner in a casual atmosphere 24/7. At Denny's, the lunch and dinner menu has a variety of appetizers, craveable burgers, salads, and entrees, along with the best desserts in town. Wherever you live in Santa Clarita, there's a Denny's close by. If you're pulling an all-nighter or don't feel like cooking, get into Denny's today. Good stuff is happening at Denny's.
Hi, it's Ashley with Waste Management. Have you ever heard the phrase, one bad apple spoils the bunch? The same is true for recycling. One non-recyclable item can spoil an entire load of otherwise good material. This may seem like a small issue, but it represents a huge problem that's preventing tons of recyclables from ever seeing a second life. Working together, we can do better by following 3 simple rules. Recycle all bottles, cans, cardboard, glass, and paper. Keep items clean and dry, and no plastic bags in the recycling. For more recycling tips, follow us on Twitter at WM_SoCal.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Again, you're listening to Mike McGrath with Your Money Path with Mike McGrath, and my guest, Steve LePore. We just left off. We were just talking about the idea of being others-centered as we look at our financial resources, look at our time and our talent as being very important. I think money is, at the end of the day, a tool, and I think a lot of times we make the mistake of treating it as the end rather than the means. And so the focus today with Steve is to kind of get to the why and how we can be that other-centered person. I asked Steve to come on because he has lived his life that way, and as much as I don't want to put the highlight on Steve, because that's not Steve's style, which is actually to your credit, I think it's good through the stories that you've experienced and things to kind of tell people, like, these are the joys and the benefits. You talk about little Miguel.
Sure.
He's the most joyous kid in town back then at age 9, but he was also one of the most generous people in town, and sounds like is to this day. So I think there's a connection there. And so sliding a little bit back into your story, and we'll just take a shallow dive so we can drive back out to the stories that you've encountered afterwards. But so as I shared in the beginning of the show, my experience with you started when you were transitioning, in a sense, if I can put it this way, out of corporate world. And so to kind of set a little context, I do remember this much because this was back in the heyday of the Lakers.
Right.
This is a young man now with season tickets, the whole shebang, right? Living the dream, and effectively just walked away. I mean, I'm sure you've been to a Laker game since, but the idea was it was a major lifestyle change, to say the least. So not so much to go dwell on the details of that, but the idea of your why, because you've transitioned out, and maybe some of the things you experienced as you built an organization, My Friend's Place, still existing and thriving today.
31 years old.
You built it from scratch. So this is a couple sack lunches around Skid Row somewhere, and that became quite this organization. You were just telling me you did the 30th anniversary, and Jack Black.
He hosted.
Miley
Cyrus performed.
Yeah, so think about, there's a guy sitting in some office in Hollywood one day saying, gosh, we got a lot of homeless people. Maybe I should give them a sandwich. 30 years later, it becomes a major event hosted by movie stars and the A-list.
And those stories there are many, many, many hundreds, maybe thousands of them. So it's by no means unique. I just had the good fortune to be a part of it.
Well, true. So as you made that, and as you're building this organization, and I say as you're building a little loose, but as you're going through the experience of this growing organization, I mean, tell me some things that inspired you to continue. There had to have been some dark times where you're thinking either you can't pay rent or you can't pay the office rent or something, right? There had to have been, it wasn't all rosy, like everyone just gave you a check for 7 figures and you rode off into the sunset.
Well, I think in truth, first of all, to be very clear, I didn't just walk away from the corporate world. It pained me to do so.
So you lied to me, is what you're saying.
Perhaps. I really had to think about it because of those things that at the time meant so much to me. So you mentioned the Lakers and the season tickets. That was the greatest hurdle for me in the very beginning, was deciding, I'm not going to be able to do this.
Okay.
And the truth is that the next season, I sat in better seats at more games than when I had and shared my season tickets with my buddy that I bought them with. So that's been my experience all along. And it's every time I look back, it's like, oh my goodness, this was not nearly as difficult in terms of sacrifice as maybe in my mind I thought it would be. But what I do know is that when you make a decision to turn right or turn left in terms of your life focus or what you'd like to accomplish, whether it's to be a dad, to own your own business, to whatever it is, that, in my way of thinking is that becomes our priority, that becomes our North Star, and I wanted to do it well. And so when we started my friend's place, there was a group of us, a board, staff, all of whom were committed to serving kids that were on the street and were homeless.
Yeah.
And as that began to pick up steam and as that part of who we were as a group began to mature, it was like, well, of course we're going to do this. Why wouldn't we do this? There's a need. It's almost like little Mike in Guatemala. Of course he was going to give money because there was a need. Well, of course, we were going to do this because there were, and still are, young kids on the street who, don't have a place to live, are hungry, or involved in behaviors and activities that are not good for them. So it was, of course. I think the other thing, and this I give credit to our board then and even now, is that we never overestimated or overdid, if you will, what we were supposed to do or what we could do.
Okay.
We were very paced. We were very patient, and we just did the best at what we could do, and then we added as we were able. I think a lot of times we get into trouble when we stretch a little bit too far. If you want to draw it back to your particular career and what you help people do, is a lot of times we get into trouble because we extend ourselves.
Right.
We have
Take
way
out
too
debt.
much
You
debt.
can't really do it, yeah.
Why? Don't do it. And that allows you to do other things, and then it allows you, if you're wise, and I had wise people around me, to pace yourself and to last. My friend's place is 31 years old now and has been sustained, money in the bank, and still doing amazing work. But it partly was because we never overextended.
Right. So what's true for the organization is true for the individual.
I believe so.
So I would say why sometimes we overextend ourselves is because I think our heart gets skewed and kind of chases something that maybe is either premature at best or even harmful at worst.
Yeah, and almost always unnecessary.
Right, because you have, and organizationally speaking, because I've been on boards and stuff as well, you have sort of that mission drift.
Sure.
Right?
Well, mission drift is toxic for organizations, but even understanding there might be something that is within mission, but maybe now it just isn't the right time. And that's okay. The idea here is to always be available, not just available when it's convenient or not just available when, you're available, but to always make certain that you're able to provide for people that have need.
Okay. So in those years, and this would translate even to 1 in 6 as well, but because that was started from the ground up as well.
That's right. Yeah.
what would you say one or two of the biggest challenges you had? Would it be one, just the wisdom and the discipline to be patient? Would that be one of them, or?
I think, I can only speak personally.
Right.
I don't want to speak corporately because I represent organizations that have, hundreds of people, board members, advisory board members, staff, volunteers. But I think for me personally, the two biggest concerns or I'm not sure what the right word is, but those things that always are on my mind are fundraising without question. How are we going to pay staff? How are we going to pay the rent? Always very important. And we're a national nonprofit currently. Doesn't mean we're out of the woods. Doesn't mean that we're not looking for support. So I'm mindful of that always. But the other thing is to balance good self-care, both for myself and others.
Right.
We are obligated, we are committed as an organization to giving ourselves away to whatever the mission is, but over time, not right away. And so over time requires that you take good care of yourself.
Right.
And that means, any number of things to people. But those are the two things that I think are always top of mind for me is I'm always trying to figure out how are we going to make ends meet. And not that it's a desperate situation, but it's important. I'm not cavalier about it. And then I'm always also trying to make certain that myself, my staff, everyone involved is taking care of themselves because that's what allows us to move forward, to be sustained in our work.
So it might be part of that, I'm thinking as you're talking, is the willingness and the discipline to, as you think about fundraising, you're not just thinking about the next payroll. You're thinking about a year out and 2 years out, as best you can plan, because obviously as the further out you go in the future, the less we really know.
Yeah.
So I think of financial planning more broadly as for families and things, as much as it is for organizations, is the willingness to sit down and think it through. What kind of income will I have? What kind of giving do we want to do? Mm-hmm. Not that you have to do it right now, necessarily if you want to give a certain amount of money. I know a lot of times local organizations or churches here, synagogues, where they raise money for a building or something, right? They're looking for a pledge, so you may give that money over a period of time, so you got to plan that out as opposed to they need all that money right now. Well, they would love to have that money right now, but so the idea of thinking it through and trying to not put yourself in a position where you're overextended, even if your heart's in the right place.
Yeah, I think it's important to be disciplined, and that goes as far back as, it can. So with me, I saw this 9-year-old Guatemalan, and the heart that he had, and I thought, all right, I'd really like to be like that. Well, that requires discipline. I'm not terribly good at it all the time, but on those times that I do well, it's because I'm disciplined. I also think it's an absolute choice. I mean, we choose every day to turn right or left, to go forward or nowhere. And, while we are, I believe it's our responsibility to care for ourselves and those that, are in our purview that we love and care for, it's also our obligation to care for others who no one else is caring for.
Right. Well, that brings me to some of, like I said earlier, in some of these organizations, some just the causes, not just the organization, but I think in some respect it's where you've gone places where a lot of people either aren't aware or they just are uncomfortable.
It's almost always the latter.
Yeah. Okay. Or they as a result, you're kind of finding that person that no one's paying that attention to or reaching out to and that sort of thing. Yeah. So as you transitioned away, you transitioned back here, I should say, from my friend's place, right? And how long did that go?
Well, it's still going. So the city,
your involvement.
So the city called us and said, "Would you help us with a needs assessment of high school age students in Santa Clarita?" Yep. And that was almost 20 years ago now. So we did a needs assessment. What came from the needs assessment was what's called the SCV Youth Project.
Right.
And that, I believe, I'm certain that they're 19 years old today. So my friend's place is 31. Okay. The SCV Youth Project is 19. And I was involved in that in the first 4 years.
Okay.
And then decided it would be good for me to consult. And so I started consulting to nonprofits, doing some public speaking. But my consulting was basically with nonprofits about how can you operate more effectively, and how do you build a budget, and how do you become sustainable? How do you find board members? On and on and on.
Yeah.
And I did that. Yeah. The how-tos. And I did that for about 4 years.
Okay. And then we transitioned to 1 and 6. So tell me how that got started and what you guys are doing.
So 1 and 6, our work is with adult men, as I said, who are either survivors of childhood sexual abuse or sexual assault as adults. And 11 years ago, actually 13 years ago, we're 11 years old, but 13 years ago, I came to find out that I have that in my history. And when I went to look for help, there was none. And I thought, well, this stinks, number one. And I thought, number two, I'd started 2 other organizations. They were both thriving. I thought, let's start a 3rd organization.
Right.
And so I called one of my best friends, and she's my thought partner, or was my thought partner on all things.
Remember her, yeah.
Heidi.
Yeah.
And we took a hike, and she sort of took all this crazy jumbled mess that was in my mind, and we wrote a little business plan, and were able to get it funded. And today we're the only national nonprofit working with adult men. We don't work with minors. We don't work with children. And we don't work with anyone other than male identifying adults. And, we are as good as you can get in the field specific to.
Well, you're kind of maverick's not the word, entrepreneur in the sense, but you're sort of the first to do this at that level. Am I right?
Our group is indeed.
Yeah.
So the staff, the board,
a little bit
they
of learning
are all,
as you go. A little bit.
You learn as you go. There's nobody that's paved this way for us. And our group, all of our group, are social entrepreneurs in one way or another.
Okay.
Staff members, volunteers, all of them fully appreciate and understand sort of the entrepreneurial side of what we're doing.
Okay.
Because it's not been done before.
Right. So whether it's that or my friend's place or the youth project, I mean, there has to be times where we choose to do what we think is the right thing, but it's still tough, right?
Of course.
So as you fought through some tough times along the way, what are a couple of inspirational successes? And I'm asking because as I think about anyone who listened to this, whether now or later through a link or something, again, my hope in this, in the context of the show, which is to really think about money as more of the means to an end and the discipline, the character traits that we need to have to do well in life with it.
Yep.
This show specifically was to inspire those to be others focused. That's why I'm going with it. Like, what kept you going to maintain that?
The little kid that took his shoes off and his socks off and brought him up to the front of the room. The 9-year-old Guatemalan boy who emptied his pockets into a bucket for people that were poor. I mean, I have had the good fortune to observe countless thousands of people who are broken, who are poor, but who find a way to serve others, to give, to want to do well and good for the sake of others.
Right.
That's a constant motivator for me to get up and get going. I'm one of the most privileged people I know.
I like that. Now, if it's appropriate, you told me a story the other day that kind of tied a couple of these periods of your life, if you look at them all as sagas, together. And you were working with someone for 1 in 6 who wanted to get involved, right? Is that an appropriate story?
It's
obviously
appropriate. I
won't
use names,
right,
but it is indeed appropriate. And I think it punctuates my bank account. My bank account is full of these kinds of stories.
Right.
Now, I can't take that into Macy's and say I need a new sport coat, but I tell you what, I take it to the bank every day and remind myself of, again, how privileged and fortunate I am.
Okay, so if I recall the story, I don't want to butcher it. Okay, because I don't want to butcher it.
How are we on time? When do we need to break?
How much we got left? 3
3
minutes?
We can do
3.
I'm pretty long-winded, but we'll give it a shot. So
we'll go 5.
We have 5 minutes. Okay, so we're good in 5 minutes. So our work, again, is with adult men. We had a fellow contact us who is an actor.
Okay.
You'd probably know him, or your kids would certainly know him. He's 30, wanted to get involved. And our nature is always to say our organization's philosophical approach is, well, that's great, but let's talk first. Let's make sure it's okay for you. Because the last thing we want to do is have anybody of celebrity become involved and then have it set them back in terms of their own recovery or their career or what have you. So met with this fellow, had lunch with him, and I was fairly convinced that he's well-intended, but he's not quite there yet.
Okay.
And I said, you know what, I really think we need to put the brakes on, and we'll figure out a way to work with you that's not quite as dramatic or out front. And like any 30-year-old, he was like, okay, but... And he said, would you talk to my agent? And I said, indeed, I will. I'd love to talk to your agent. I'm going to tell him the same thing, but I'll speak with him. And his agent, late 40s, very successful, A-list clients. And so, one, it told me that this young fellow's legit.
Right.
And two, I thought, I'll speak with him. Absolutely. So we talked. And what he said to me was, thank you so much. He said, I've been thinking the very same thing. I think it's a little bit premature. And I'm grateful that you have the same perspective. And so we were on the same page. And then there was this moment where our conversation was ending, and he said, hey, what'd you do before 1 in 6? And I said, well, I worked with homeless kids in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And he said, really, where did you work with homeless kids in Hollywood? And I said, well, I worked for an organization called My Friend's Place. And I don't know if you've ever spoken with anyone over the phone where you can feel the intensity and the tension and
you can sense
the drama.
The change in emotion and all that.
And there was this pause. And so I thought I need to break the pause. And I said, well, have you ever heard of My Friend's Place? And he said, indeed, I have. He said, you used to serve me when I walked in off the street and looked for food.
Wow. I love that. Yeah, I still get chills when you tell that story.
So do I.
So it brings kind of all these sort of eras or epics of these different organizations in your life, and in a sense kind of ties it together.
Well, the other thing that I'm reminded of constantly is we'll never know the good we've done in most cases. So that story was a reminder of the good that our work was for folks on the streets in Hollywood. But most of us will do work and never know the good that's been done. And frankly, that's not the reason to do it. You do it to do good work. You don't do it to know about it.
Well, and I think, again, relating it to the broader theme, I think wealth needs to be defined way more than just an asset liability, balance sheet, that sort of thing. Because that's wealth as far as I'm concerned.
Indeed.
So, well, I tell you, we're going to cut real quickly, pay some bills, as they say. This, again, is Mike McGrath with Your Money Path with Mike McGrath, KHTS 1220 and 98.1.
The best live theater can be found right here in the Santa Clarita Valley. The Canyon Theater Guild has been entertaining audiences for decades with top-quality musicals and plays. Located on Main Street in Old Town Newhall, CTG also offers workshops for the young actor in your family. For more information, call the box office at 799-2702 or go online to canyontheater.org.
There are many memorable restaurants in Santa Clarita, but 3 words stand out from the crowd. Mom can cook.
Mamá puede cocinar.
Mom can cook the best Thai food on this side of the planet.
Mama fait la cuisine.
No matter what language you use, Mom Can Cook says it all. Thai food at its finest, all your favorite dishes, and Mom's very own original specialties. Experience it on Soledad by the Canyon Country Post Office.
Mama料理が上手ですよ.
Mom Can Cook.
Hi, Kirk Stinson here with Plumbing by Kirk, your hometown plumber, here to let you know that it's sometimes more cost-effective to have Plumbing by Kirk fix it than to have your husband wrestle with those plumbing problems. And if you play your cards right, you might not have to let him know that we were even there. We invite you to visit our website for free plumbing advice at plumbingbykirk.com or give us a call, 263-6519. That's 263-6519.
My dad is the best plumber ever. Plumbing by Kirk.
Men, are you feeling tired, stressed, or just don't have the energy you used to? Did you know this could be related to decreased testosterone levels? Luckily, there's a safe, effective solution. Weeder Prime helps support healthy testosterone levels with clinically tested key ingredients. Just 2 capsules of Weeder Prime each day can help change your mood, energy, focus, body fat, and lean muscle. Feel the way you felt 10, 20, even 30 years ago. Rediscover your Prime with Weeder Prime. To find a retailer near you, visit WeederPrime.com. That's WEIDER Prime.com.
Well, welcome back, everyone. This is Mike McGrath with Your Money Path with Mike McGrath, kind of to wrap up our hour in the next couple minutes with my guest, Steve LePore. As we get back into some conversation, I wanted to do a quick shout-out to the staff over at 1 and 6. I got Andy, Meredith, and Seth. Steve wanted me to make sure that you guys were actually in the office and working, just FYI. So more to come on that. So I was giving my orders, guys, giving my orders. So as we kind of look to wrap up the subject, and we've been talking a lot about trying to have the heart and the mindset of being others-focused, being intentional with reaching out. You mentioned something earlier in passing. Certainly want to take care of ourselves in the sense of being balanced, but take care of the ones we love, but then reach out to those who no one else is going to be caring for.
Sure, I think it's an action.
Right.
We can't wait for folks to knock on our door and say, I need help. When we see help that's needed, I think we need to honor that. I've got a story that happened literally 2 weeks ago, and it was awesome. I was driving down McBean, right across the street from the YMCA is the entrance to a subdivision. And there was a woman, middle-aged, Caucasian woman, nice, beautiful Jeep. She had pulled over, and I didn't know if she was, experiencing car trouble or what. So
Right.
I just circled around.
It was a Jeep, so it could be.
You never know. And you'll never have their support for your show. But so I circled back around, and then I watched her, and what she did was she pulled over to get out, and she walked to the bus stop, and there was somebody at the bus stop who was obviously in distress, who was hungry, who probably was homeless, and she gave them a bag of something, food or whatever.
Yeah.
So I pulled back around and pulled up next to her, and I said, I want you to know that I saw that, and I'm thankful. And she just said, well, I have to do what I have to do.
Huh.
And my sense is that she probably had, I don't know, one of her kids' lunches, or she had
Right.
just gone to Ralph's or whatever it was. But she saw the need, and instead of driving by, she pulled over to take care of it. That's an example.
Yeah. Well, I think if you, I'd like to think if you have sort of that mindset, you start to notice that.
But you have
sort
to
of
look
thing, too.
for it.
Right.
You
right.
can't wait for it to show up. You actually have to have a radar that says, maybe my neighbor has a need. Maybe this mom who's a single mom whose refrigerator broke has a need.
Right.
I think we're foolish if we think, and frankly, I think not only are we foolish, but it's very unsatisfying to just wait for need to present itself. I think we have to
Right.
look for it.
Or worse yet, not to even be looking at all, even if
Indeed.
it came to you. So, well, one thing I was thinking of as you've been talking is a lot of times we think about a conversation like this, and minds will shift to, well, what kind of resources, usually monetary, do I have to give to a 1 in 6 or a My Friend's Place or your church or whatever it might be? And you might feel limited. Maybe you are a single mom with 3 kids and just barely making ends meet, or whatever the case might be, but you're not in a great financial position. I wanted to add something about it's not just money, but a lot of what you've done, it's about time, right? So I had this other quote. I think this was from a gentleman by the name of Tim Moore. I didn't write down the name at the time, but I think it was. He's written in financial planning stuff a lot, but he says, I can always make more money through my labor, at least theoretically, or through my investments, or even just through luck. But I can never make more time. So time is limited, so my capacity to effectuate love is limited. Yet I often give leftover love to those I love. So I steal from those I feel the most for, and he says, for what? So I think the idea was, in my mind, as I'm reading this and kind of writing my paraphrases of it, is if you're out there listening to this, it doesn't mean you have to be Bill Gates and you have 30 billion or whatever it was he put in there, or Warren Buffett to effectuate change. You can just be someone driving by, take the time. Sure. I suppose the lunch was a resource materially, but the concept is broader than that, right? So the idea is that having the mindset and the heart and to go out and do something, you can just volunteer somewhere and use your time, and you don't ever need to write a check per se.
Sure.
Because somebody else might be able to write a check and they don't have as much time. So the two of you together have a great team.
Absolutely.
So let me get so a lot of times on this show, I kind of warned you about this, but they're fun. So usually 5, but I probably won't get to them all. But quick questions, just as you think about the world. So if you could have one person in the world get their finances in order, or better order, who would it be?
If I could have one person in the world get their finances in order?
Yeah, like to be a better person and be more like what we've been talking about, the inspirations of the stories that you've shared.
I have to be very honest. I can't think of a soul who doesn't have a pretty good handle on their means. I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but, I have friends that have debt. I have friends that maybe, made a bad decision or whatever, but not to the extent that they find themselves in harm's way.
Okay.
So that might not have been a good question for me.
Okay. Well, you personally, if you could take one financial decision back in your lifetime, what would it be?
Truthfully, it was that I sold Sirius stock way too early.
Well, I didn't mean it unseriously.
A buddy and I invested in Sirius Radio at 25 cents a share.
Oh.
And my nature was, once I hit a particular threshold, I sell it. Well, we hit the threshold, I sold it, and it's now probably worth $4 a share. So
right.
I would take that back.
Fair enough. All right, one last question here. So we've kind of touched on this, but more of maybe as a means of summarizing our conversation. If you can pick more than one thing, but what would you say the most important thing to invest in is?
Well, others.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. But I think you can only do that if you're taking care of yourself. So, I don't want to start the answer by saying, well, take care of yourself, but you need to take care of yourself.
Right, that's part of it.
Your health, your well-being, so on and so forth. But I think we're made to care for ourselves and others is very broadly defined. It could be the person that just walked in front of the studio whose car is, in disrepair or, I don't know, won't start or whatever.
Right, I understand.
To family members, to, others. I just think it's really important for us to know that there's a great opportunity that we should look for, and that from that opportunity comes great wealth. And it's wealth that's not defined by a decimal point, but it is an amazing ride to be able to be an observer of others' stories, to be a part of others' experiences and lives, and to look back and say, okay, I feel like we gave it a pretty good shot. And I think our group, from the day one of my friend's place to today at 1 and 6, our staff, our board, our advisory board, and everyone involved, I think all of us have done a really good job at trying to do that every day.
It's this Tim Moore I just quoted. There's a great line in his book where he said, he's talking about, he's a wealth manager himself. So he said, I think the wealth equals enough. And enough doesn't necessarily mean more. And I think that, as you were talking, that's what I was thinking of. I think wealth should equal what enough is. So it doesn't mean you have to be wealthy in the sense of rich, but in the sense of doing what I think is important. And
I would argue that if we really took a look at it, most folks that you and I know have more than enough.
That's probably true. Well, I tell you what, as we conclude this, I want to throw out a couple of things for me in the sense of if you're listening to this and you want to talk further about these issues or any of these kinds of subjects, ways to get a hold of me. You can reach me via email at mmcgrath@epwealth.com. You can also go to epwealth.com/Valencia. So, again, I have a local office here, although we have offices throughout the western United States. So happy to talk via phone, get together, and so I think these issues are important. And I'd like to you, and I thank you, Steve, for your time.
My pleasure.
You've inspired me, and I hope together we can inspire many others to, again, think others-minded, maybe a better way to put that. And so I think from that, I'll sign off from here. But again, you're listening to Mike McGrath and your Money Path with Mike McGrath. And until next time, have a great day.